Breaking: South African court to decide Edgar Lungu's burial date. Will he ever be laid to rest? Months after former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu's shocking death, one question continues to haunt both Zambia and South Africa. Why hasn't he been buried yet? His body still lies in a Pretoria funeral home, while the world watches in disbelief. A man who once ruled a nation, now caught in a legal battle even after death. The South African courts have now stepped in, promising to set the final burial date once and for all. But behind this legal decision lies a storm of political tension, family conflict, and international drama. Why is the Lungu family divided over his final resting place? What secrets are locked in the court documents that no one wants to talk about? And most importantly, will Edgar Lungu ever be laid to rest, or will politics bury him twice? Stay with us, because what happens inside that South African courtroom could rewrite Lungu's legacy forever. Welcome to InspirAfrica Official, the home of truth-driven stories that shape Africa's future. Today, we dive into one of the most emotional and politically charged sagas in Zambia's modern history: the ongoing battle over Edgar Lungu's burial. In this video, we'll uncover how a South African court became the unexpected stage for Zambia's biggest family and political confrontation. We'll explore the body that never returned. Inside the courtroom drama, a nation divided in grief. The international dilemma. What happens next? This is not just about a burial. It's about power, memory, and the battle to control the story of Edgar Lungu's life and death. Let's begin. Former Zambian President Edgar Lungu's burial has become one of the most controversial sagas in African politics. Months after his death, the South African courts are now preparing to decide when, or if, he'll finally be buried. In this exclusive InspirAfrica official report, we uncover new details behind the courtroom battles, the emotional divisions within the Lungu family, and the political tensions between Lusaka and Pretoria. Is justice finally coming, or is this just another delay in Africa's most mysterious case? Watch till the end for exclusive insights and powerful analysis on what could be the final chapter of Edgar Lungu's story. Subscribe for more deep political documentaries and breaking stories from across Africa. The body that never returned. When the news of Edgar Chagwa Lungu's death first broke in Johannesburg, the shock was immediate and overwhelming. Zambia stood still. A man who once held the nation's highest office, a former president, commander-in-chief, and father figure to millions, had suddenly fallen silent. But as the initial grief turned to confusion, an even more perplexing story began to unfold. Days passed, then weeks. Yet, Lungu's body never made its journey back home. Instead, it remained in South Africa, inside a Pretoria funeral home, as questions mounted. Why hadn't the body returned to Zambia for burial? What was really going on behind closed doors? Insiders soon began to speak, cautiously. They claimed that Esther Lungu, the late president's widow, had refused to release the remains until specific conditions were met. Among them, she allegedly demanded guarantees of safety, not just for herself but for the entire family, fearing that the funeral could become a political battleground. She also wanted assurance that her husband's burial would be handled with dignity and respect, not turned into a state-controlled spectacle. Meanwhile, the Zambian government quietly prepared its own case, insisting that the state holds the right to bury any former head of state with full honors, regardless of family objections. They argued that keeping the body outside the country was not only disrespectful but also damaging to Zambia's image on the global stage. What began as a family disagreement quickly spiraled into a political tug-of-war. Lungu's body, once the vessel of national power, had now become a symbol of division, caught between love, loyalty, and law. And now, months later, this painful standoff has crossed borders, landing squarely in the hands of South Africa's courts, which must decide what happens next. Inside the courtroom drama. The Pretoria High Court has now become the center of one of the most emotionally charged and politically sensitive legal battles in Zambia's history, though it's unfolding hundreds of kilometers away, on South African soil. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is tense. Every hearing draws a crowd, journalists, diplomats, and members of the Zambian diaspora, all waiting to see how the fate of Edgar Lungu's body will be decided. At the front, two sides sit divided by grief and politics. On one side stands Esther Lungu, the widow of the late president, flanked by her fierce legal counsel, Makibi Zulu. Their argument is clear. The former president's burial should be handled with dignity and independence, not dictated by the same government that, in their view, persecuted him in his final years. They insist that President Hakainde Hichilema's administration is attempting to hijack the funeral for political theater, to appear magnanimous before the world while silencing the true narrative of how Lungu was treated. Zulu's team has been unrelenting, filing petitions to delay any burial until the family's demands are fully met. They claim this is not defiance, but defense, a widow's right to protect her husband's legacy. On the other side, Zambia's state attorneys argue that this standoff has gone too far. They say the continued delay embarrasses the nation and fuels speculation, insisting that Lungu must be repatriated immediately for a state funeral befitting his office. Court documents obtained by journalists reveal the judge faces two unprecedented questions. Keycap 1: who has the ultimate right to decide how a former head of state is buried? His family or his nation? Keycap 2: can South Africa even decide on the burial of another country's president? It's a legal and moral nightmare, a clash of sovereignty, family grief, and political symbolism that no one ever thought Zambia would face. A nation divided in grief. Back home in Zambia, emotions are running high. What began as a solemn period of mourning for former President Edgar Lungu has transformed into a national debate, one that has split families, friends, and political allies right down the middle. In Lusaka, mourners still gather quietly at churches and former PF offices, holding up portraits of Lungu and chanting, "Bring him home." Black ribbons and candles line the streets, silent symbols of grief and defiance. Many Zambians, especially in the Copperbelt and Eastern Province, insist the former head of state deserves a dignified homecoming and burial on Zambian soil, no matter the politics surrounding his death. But across town, others are growing impatient, questioning why what should have been a respectful process has turned into what they describe as a political circus. Social media has become a battleground. Hashtags like #LetHimRest and #JusticeForLungu trend daily, with users clashing over whether the standoff honors or dishonors Lungu's memory. Supporters of the Patriotic Front, PF, accuse President Hakainde Hichilema's government of deliberately dragging the process to humiliate the Lungu family, calling it a continuation of political persecution from beyond the grave. But UPND loyalists fire back, arguing that PF sympathizers are exploiting Lungu's death to regain public sympathy and rebuild their fractured movement ahead of the 2026 elections. Political analysts say this moment is about more than just where Lungu will be buried, it's about what he represents. For some, Lungu symbolizes corruption, economic decline, and abuse of power. For others, he remains a man of the people, a leader who rose from humble beginnings and defended ordinary Zambians. Now, as court proceedings continue in South Africa, one painful truth remains: Zambia is mourning, but it's mourning in two very different ways. The international dilemma. Behind closed doors, a quiet storm is brewing between Zambia and South Africa, one that few officials are willing to speak about publicly. The question of where and how Edgar Lungu should be buried has now evolved into a diplomatic minefield, testing the strength of regional cooperation and exposing sensitive political undercurrents across southern Africa. According to diplomatic insiders, senior officials from both governments have held multiple confidential meetings in Pretoria and Lusaka, desperately trying to defuse what one diplomat described as a full-blown international embarrassment in the making. For South Africa, the situation is a nightmare. On one hand, its judiciary must uphold local laws regarding the custody of a deceased foreign national. On the other, Pretoria cannot afford to be seen as interfering in Zambia's domestic politics, especially in a case involving a former head of state. But just when things couldn't get more complicated, reports began surfacing that Lungu may have possessed multiple passports, including a controversial Zimbabwean travel document allegedly used during his frequent visits to Harare. If verified, this revelation would ignite an even bigger storm, raising serious questions about citizenship, diplomatic immunity, and which nation technically holds the legal right to authorize his burial. South African officials have remained tight-lipped, saying only that the matter is under review, but analysts warn that any decision could have major political consequences. A ruling in favor of Zambia's government could spark outrage among PF loyalists and deepen divisions at home. But siding with the Lungu family could strain diplomatic ties and set a precedent that complicates future regional cases. For now, Pretoria is walking a tightrope, and as court day approaches, one thing is certain: this is no longer just about a burial. It's about national pride, sovereignty, and regional stability. What happens next? So, what happens next? After months of tense legal wrangling, emotional statements, and diplomatic silence, the Pretoria High Court is finally set to deliver its ruling. According to court insiders, the final hearing is scheduled imminently, and the judge's verdict could come within just a few days. For both Zambia and South Africa, the outcome will be historic. If the court sides with the Lungu family, it would mark a stunning victory for Esther Lungu and her legal team. The decision could allow the body to remain in South Africa, at least temporarily, or even pave the way for a private burial on foreign soil, far from the political noise of Lusaka. Such a move would be unprecedented, a former Zambian president being laid to rest outside his homeland, and would almost certainly ignite another national debate about patriotism, power, and legacy. But if the ruling favors the Zambian state, the clock will start ticking fast. Within 72 hours, sources say, the remains could be flown back to Lusaka for an official state funeral at the presidential memorial site, under the supervision of the government. It would mark the end of months of legal gridlock, but not necessarily the end of the controversy. Either way, this case has done more than delay a burial. It has exposed the raw, unhealed wounds of Zambia's politics, the mistrust between leaders, the scars left by Lungu's years in power, and the painful struggle over who gets to define his legacy. And so, as the nation holds its breath, one haunting question lingers in every conversation, every headline, and every prayer. Right arrow, will Edgar Chagwa Lungu ever truly be laid to rest, not just in body, but in history? This story is still unfolding, and in the coming days, Zambia could witness one of the most extraordinary moments in its modern political history. A former president's fate, decided not in Lusaka, but in a foreign courtroom. Stay tuned to InspirAfrica Official for every twist, every revelation, and every truth behind this extraordinary saga.